So this piece comes from on the 20th of November, so it's quite almost an old piece by now, but its message still quite rings true. So I think it's worth going back to revisit this. And this is comes from the Guardian from the opinion piece from there. It basically goes: Johnson's "Get Brexit Done" drumbeat cannot drown out reality forever. This is something we have been saying on this channel for quite some time. The When Brexit meets reality, reality always wins. And this is reality that all these Brexiteers can't seem to get their heads around for some reason, despite the fact that you have all these experts, all these info, all these facts and information saying what was going to happen. They just want to, put the fingers in their ears and just ignore it. So, one test of a campaign slogan is how effectively it helps voters explain their preference to others and to themselves. Why Donald Trump to make America great again? To leave the EU, take back control. Simple. Boris Johnson has found the kind of groove with his pledge to, quote, get Brexit done, which is why he beats the phrase like a drum in televised leader debates this week. It packs a lot into 4 syllables: release from the EU for those who really care, and relief from those having to think about it who don't. But it has the pleasing crispness of a page being turned, while making Labour's policy feel like a threat to rend a grim chapter all over again. As policies, Get Brexit Done is snappy. As politics, Get Brexit Done is snappy, but as a policy, it's empty. And we've said this right from the beginning, going back to Theresa May's slogan, which she used. It is as vacuous a sequel to Take Back Control, starring the same falsehood about Britain's global stature. Johnson's claim now is that the referendum campaign is the leaving Europe is an act of empowerment. It contains the illusion that we, the liberated nation, tell them, the spurned continentals, how things will be. 3 years of negotiation tell a different story. The UK tried to retain privileges of EU membership without abiding by the rules, and that failed. And it watched its deal deteriorate as a result. If the Tories win a majority, which they have done, that pattern repeats all next year. The old movie will be remade with the same gallop towards a cliff edge, cheered on by hardliners about clean breaks. Johnson's plan is to complete a comprehensive free trade deal before the transitional agreements expire next December. More time is available, but he insists it will not be necessary. Under the terms of the withdrawal agreement extension that would be have to be sought by July, the government would need to make record-breaking progress in final status talks in the first months of 2020. For Johnson's boast to be vindicated, that looks unlikely. Trade talks between advanced economies can fill the best part of a decade. Ministers have 3 lines of defence for their improbable timetable. First, the UK and the EU start from what Johnson describes as a perfect alignment and harmony, so there isn't much to adjust. Second, Phil Hogan, the EU Trade Commissioner, has said that a year is sufficient. Third, people said Johnson couldn't ditch the backstop from Theresa May's deal, but he did. He is the naysayer's nemesis. Those arguments are bogus. Citing the status quo as evidence that change will be easy is an old Brexiteer con. As Sam Lowe, a trade expert for the Centre of European Reform, says, where we start isn't what matters. It's all about where we want to end up. Johnson's plan explicitly mandates divergence from EU norms. Its purpose is to carve out competitive advantage through deregulation. Brussels sees that as a threat to undercut continental business and dump substandard goods on EU customers. The price of market access is set at a high level of compliance with EU rules, which the Tories despise. The narrowness of the channel and the Eurosceptic fixation on de-alignment combine to make future trade talks harder and EU dealings with more remote countries. When EU officials nod along with the tight timetable, they are being polite and trying not to spook British voters. The Commission wants a deal ratified as much as Johnson does. An imbalance of power favours Brussels as much in the next phase as it did within withdrawal talks. A new hand is dealt, but the rules don't change. The lone states gets weaker cards than the bloc of 27. The Commission brings cold-blooded negotiators hardened over decades of top-level technical negotiation. The UK brings a demoralised civil service with little experience of trade talks, instructed by the delusional Tories who think free trade is something to do with Britannia ruling the waves. As for Johnson's powers of persuasion, they are fictional. He achieved removal of the backstop by abandoning a promise not to permit a trade border between Northern Ireland and mainland Britain, burning the DUP, and reverting to a Brexit model that he had once vigorously rejected. That climb down hints at one method for meeting the December 2020 deadline. If Johnson is prepared to sign pretty much anything to show that he has met his promise of progress, he can cobble together a bare bones agreement, according to Sabine Wayland, head of the EU's Trade Directorate. That would still need subsequent negotiation and phased implementation, but there is probably a way to stretch the transition to an 11th hour, calling it something else to allow Johnson the pretense of not having begged for an extension. First overboard in the Great Betrayal will be fishermen. Brexit offered them a false hope that foreign trawlers would be banished from UK waters, but the hated quotas will be back. Other maritime EU states will demand these as a concession for progress in talks over other issues. Johnson will fold, and then systematically let down other voters who trusted him. If returned to Downing Street, he will spend the next year climbing the steep learning curve towards the realisation that Britain thrives on frictionless access to the single market, something his deal prevents. He will discover the finer points of rules of origin that make it up, that make it uneconomic for manufacturers to keep their links in the supply chain outside the EU. He will notice businesses using transition to activate relocation plans that they had drafted for emergency evacuation in case of a no-deal Brexit. His diplomacy will be sabotaged by Tory hardliners paranoid about gravitization back into Brussels orbit. The impotence for a trade deal with Washington will spur on Eurosceptic zealots into battle against any pragmatist who tries to repair relations with Europe. Johnson will lie like crazy to appease both sides and be despised for the duplicity. That doesn't mean Brexit will still dominate the headlines. If the Tories prevail on polling day, they will have a mandate to change the subject, and the vanquished opposition will not foist Brussels businesses back into the news. Jeremy Corbyn is already trying to foist it out of the election campaign. Neither of the main candidates to be Prime Minister sees benefit for themselves in a realistic debate about Britain's European future. Why should they? Realism is a gloomy slogan, a meandering number with discontent harmonies and no prospect of a satisfying resolution. It is not a humble tune. It lacks the upbeat tempo of Get Brexit Done, which has the makings of a one-hit Christmas wonder to the top of the electoral charts. But as the months go by, as it will become soon, Johnson's jaunty tune will be an awkward memory, and Brexit is still not done. So that's rather, I think, pathetic, and I think, considering that when you take into account the Conservatives do have that majority, pretty much nothing has changed. Europe holds all the cards. We hold nothing. We are going to get completely screwed over, and all these businesses are going to relocate because the just-in-time stuff, country of origin rules that keeps it, sane, they will go. We will lose all that single market access as well that has benefited Britain so much. And as we've gone through before already, independent reports, not just the government reports, show how much we would lose compared to trying getting a trade deal with the US, which would give us about 0.1 to 0.2% in return for losing everything we've lost, GDP-wise, jobs-wise, from the leaving the European Union. So Johnson is on course, I think, for a massive failure, and there will be, don't get me wrong, there will be a honeymoon period. How long that will last, we don't know. But I guarantee you, by this time next year, we will probably potentially still be in the European Union, because two things are going to happen. Either one, Johnson will be caving under pressure. He will realise that voters have abandoned him. There could be very well be a complete split in the Tory party between the moderates and the hardliners, which could get even more, even bigger now that there are more Conservative MPs. Where they fall, or the new ones fall on this line, we currently don't know. It'll be interesting to see. But yeah, nothing has sort of changed. And Boris now has the baby. It's his responsibility, and he's going to screw it up massively. And once again, Brexit just shows how much of a bad idea it is.